Welcome to First Chapter Indie Reads. I'm Leslie, and every week I read the opening of an indie novel so you can find your next favorite author. Today, I'm reading The Risen, a World of Nightfell novel by D.W. Vogel. It's an action-adventure fantasy that was recommended to me by one of our previous authors, Nicholas Everhart. Chapter 1. The bedroom of Dolan and Rayleigh's small house smelled of sweat and blood. Dolan's hand had long since gone numb under his pale wife's strong grip, squeezing harder with every contraction. At the foot of the bed, a midwife kept peering under the sheet draped across Rayleigh's legs. Her expression grew more worried every time she met Dolan's eyes. "You're doing great, honey," Dolan said, prying his hand out of Rayleigh's and giving her his other hand to squeeze for a while. "It can't be much longer. You can do it." A noise like a dying goat tore from Rayleigh's throat as another wave hit her. She was beyond words and had been for over a cycle, hours bleeding into each other in the unending darkness of Nightfell. Just one more cycle. 24 more hours of pale, uninterrupted moonlight before the eyes of the Adamonan opened in the sky. 8 blinding suns to warm the land and drive away the horrors of the dark. "Don't push yet," the midwife said from between Rayleigh's legs. "The baby is breech. I hoped he'd turn, but he hasn't. I'm going to have to reach in and turn him myself." The old woman wiped a hand across her brow, leaving a streak of blood. Dolan hadn't looked under the sheet for hours. He leaned down and forced himself to peer at the bed beneath his wife. Blood. So much blood. He turned back to Rayleigh, whose thinned lips were white, eyes squinted shut against the pain. "You'll be fine," he comforted. "Just a little while longer." It wasn't going well. Rayleigh was a light shaper, and in the first hours of her labor, the lanterns in the room had flared with every contraction, her power to magnify and shape the light running wild as she strained. Now, the tiny flames barely flickered. Her strength was failing with each wave. The midwife stood and nodded for Dolan to follow her. "Just a minute, honey. We'll be right back." Dolan followed the midwife through the curtained doorway of their bedroom, out into the cottage's main room. One of the living ranch hands and 3 of the Risen were waiting at the long wooden table where Rayleigh served their meals every day. The Risen didn't actually have to eat, but they stayed stronger and needed fewer embalming herbs if they were well fed. "How is she?" one of the Risen hands asked. The midwife answered for Dolan, speaking in a whisper so Rayleigh wouldn't hear through the curtain. "She's in trouble. The baby is sideways, and I'm going to have to try and turn him. She's lost a lot of blood already, and turning him risks tearing the sac inside. If she can't deliver him fast, she could bleed to death very quickly." Dolan felt his face go white. "But you have herbs for that, right? Something to stop the bleeding?" She shook her head. "I already used everything I have." "Well, go get more." Her eyes dropped. "Everything I have. There is no more." Mela, the living hand, spoke up. "The caravan would have some, wouldn't they?" "Yes, the caravan." "But where is it? Are they close?" Desperation clouded Dolan's voice. "Usually passing over the high mountains around this time, if they keep to their usual schedule. It's almost daybreak and they'll be losing their Risen help. I know they leave them to freeze in the high pass so they'll stay fresh for next nightfall when they rise again." The Risen ranch hands looked to the floor, obviously not keen to be reminded that when the eyes of the Adamonan opened, they would fall, returning to the dreamless, timeless world of the dead, until they rose again next nightfall, some 90 years in the future. Dolan and Rayleigh would be long gone by then, but perhaps their son would live to see it, a very old man meeting these same Risen who were here for his birth. Dolan and Rayleigh would rise as well to meet the future generations of their family. If their son was born. If he lived. If Rayleigh lived. "I'll go." Dolan reached for his fur-lined boots and heaviest coat. Mela offered to go with him, but Dolan shook his head. Stay here, in case anyone needs anything. Of course, the Risen couldn't go. Their undead bodies would freeze much more quickly than living humans. For ranch work, they stuffed the inside pockets in their clothes with heated stones, but they still had to come back to the house every few hours to reheat. Without the support of a caravan, Risen didn't last long in the mountains. Dolan pushed through the curtain, avoiding the blood smear where the midwife's hand had touched it. He knelt next to Rayleigh's bed and took her hand again. "We need some herbs that will make it better," he said, smoothing away blonde hair glued to her sweaty forehead. "I have to go and find the caravan to get what we need, but I'll be back just as quickly as I can. You just try to rest. Don't push. Just wait for me. I promise I'll be back. I love you so much." Tears filled his eyes. "I promise, Rayleigh." She nodded, too exhausted to speak. When Dolan kissed her cheek, it was cold and clammy, as if she were already dead and Risen herself, a walking, talking corpse, held together with embalming herbs and the grace of the Adamonan gods. Dolan clutched the large, smooth stone that hung from his neck, whispering a prayer to Adalashka, whose eye was etched into its surface. He paused at the curtained doorway, averting his eyes from the crimson stain that seeped into the bedsheets at Rayleigh's feet. Her eyes were closed, breath coming in short, quick pants. "Go now." The midwife hurried past him, back into the bedroom. She would do what she could while Dolan was gone, but he had to hurry. The caravan wouldn't be easy to find in the northern passes, and Rayleigh didn't have much time. He had seen it in the midwife's furrowed expression. "Any clue where to start?" he asked Mela, filling a travel pack with some chitin scarab coins, a canteen of water and a hot rock to keep it from freezing, a few dried strips of goat meat, and a small hard loaf of bread. He wouldn't need the food. He'd be back long before he got too hungry. Surely he would. Mela shrugged. "No one knows for sure where they leave their dead, but I'd try Zigzag Pass first. It opens up to some flatter land up top. Probably a good place for them to camp at daybreak." Dolan knew Zigzag well enough. His father had died up there, chasing down a lost goat in a storm. No one ever found his body, but whenever Dolan had to secure one of the flock from the twisty passage, he looked in vain hope of finding his father's corpse in the snow that never melted. "Take this." Jack, one of the Risen ranch hands, held out a long, curved knife made from the sharp mandible of a skitter. A weapon of metal would have been better, but metal was a luxury few could afford. This was the most formidable weapon he had, and Dolan buckled the sheath around his waist gratefully. There were worse things in the high passes than ice. He strapped the travel pack over his shoulder as another moan came from behind the curtain. "Hang on, Rayleigh. I'm going for help." Chapter 2. Ice crunched under Dolan's boots as he climbed ever higher. Snow fell hard in the moonlight, obscuring his tracks almost as fast as he made them. He poked ahead of his feet with a long staff before he took each step. The pass was a labyrinth of crevasses and drop-offs, invisible in the meager light of what passed for midday during the long years of darkness, when even the pale moon dimmed to a shadow in the gray sky. Far below the ledge on which he walked, a river flowed beneath a thick coating of ice. One wrong move, and he would tumble down. Even if he survived the fall, he would never make it back up the sheer cliff face. One more cycle till daybreak. The eyes would open, the Risen would fall, but the terrors of Nightfell would be over for the rest of Dolan's lifetime. Poke, step, poke, step. He thought about his life as he crept along the ledge. For his first 15 years, Urt had been bathed in constant light. The eyes of the Adamonan shone down upon the mountains all the time. Some blinked closed for a time, leaving them in dim light for a few cycles, but even that was bright enough to keep the worst of Urt's horrors underground. Dolan loved hearing stories of Nightfell as a child, knowing the worst would never come to his mountain home. All the adults gave the same descriptions of what happened during the dark years. Predators emerged to stalk the lands, killing livestock and humans alike. Down on the flatlands, the beneathers boiled up from great cracks in the soil, tentacles waving in delight as they feasted on the human dead. but the Adamonen were wise. When their eyes closed, they called the dead to rise and protect the living. Up here, they were a sleepless watch over the goat herds in the village, fighting without pain or fear against the many-legged monsters that came out of the deep tunnels. No beneathers ever came up this high. They weren't furred and couldn't warm themselves like the goats and the other creatures of the mountain. Beneathers were all hard chitin, like the other monstrous insects and arachnids of the warmer climates. Dolan had thought he knew what was coming. He was 15 when the eyes blinked shut, exactly when the astronomers said they would. He would be 25 when they blinked back open. Tomorrow, if the astronomers had it right again, the risen would fall, and the caravan would come to take them down, to Somta, where the embalmers would preserve them for the next 90 years, until they were needed again to protect the world of the living. So it had always been for the humans of Urt, and the Beneathers hated them for the gift of the gods that let them rise during the decade of Nightfell, when the hungry creatures of darkness crept to the surface. Poke, step. Poke, step. The wind picked up, and Dolan burrowed deeper into his scarf, pulling the fur hat down over his ears. He had never been this far up Zigzag Pass. If he stepped right over his father's body, he'd never know it in the swirling snow. He and Rayleigh had married in the middle of Nightfell, 5 years ago. This first son was set to arrive at daybreak, the most auspicious day for a child to be born. But Dolan hoped he'd come tonight. Rayleigh couldn't hold out much longer. She was a strong rancher, but even she had her limits. The moon overhead was still dim. It would rise and fall one more time before daybreak. Time to find the caravan, buy the herbs, and return to Rayleigh while she lived. Or, if she didn't. He shuddered at the thought. If she didn't, he had to be home in time for her to rise, if only for a few moments. If he failed her, at least he would have a chance to beg her forgiveness. But he wouldn't fail. Poke, step. Poke, step. The ledge widened and the river fell away to his left. The hard climb flattened out a bit. To his right, the edge of the mountain dropped off in a sheer cliff face. Dolan couldn't see far in the storm, but surely this was the place. Surely the caravan would be here. He squinted, peering into the darkness for any sign of a campfire. His ears picked up no sound over the wind howling along the cliff edge. "Hello!" he shouted, cupping gloved hands around his mouth. If anyone answered, he couldn't hear them. The land was a gentle slope up now, with a shorter drop to the river on his left, and a wide open space ahead and to his right. Dolan had always been at home in the mountains. He'd grown up here, been born in the very bedroom where Rayleigh now lay waiting for him. His mother had died in that bed, just a few years after his father chased that goat up the pass, never to return. Dolan's mother had been far too frail to rise and fight, or toil at Nightfell, so they burned her body, releasing her spirit to the Adamonen in the sky, the final death after a lifetime of hard work. His heart had bled as he stood in the smoke, knowing his mother was lost to him forever as well. But Rayleigh wouldn't be lost. He would save her. A lull in the wind let a sound through. "Hello?" he called toward the noise. It stopped for a moment, leaving him uncertain he'd heard anything at all. He called out again, and the sound returned. Not voices, but a strange, clicking noise. The wheels of a caravan plunging through snow? The legs of a furred beast pulling a heavy wagon? Clouds parted overhead, allowing moonlight to shine through the glittering snowflakes. Movement across the wide clearing caught his eye, and he pushed through knee-deep powder. Wind swirled around him, and frost caked his eyelashes. He rubbed at them with heavy gloves, blinking the ice away. Glowing red eyes blinked at him from across the plain. 12 eyes, and groups of 4, set far enough apart to freeze the blood in his veins. Drillers, 3 of them. The monstrous, shaggy beasts of Nightfell prowled the dark mountain passes in the bright years, hiding in the shadows. But since the eyes had closed, leaving the land in darkness, the shadow creatures had grown bold, occasionally venturing near town, plucking goats from the herds. Dolan and his crew had killed 2 of them in the past few years. It took 5 men armed with ropes and blades to bring one down, and the last one had damaged one of the risen farmhands beyond repair. Now, Dolan was alone, poorly armed, and there were 3 of them. He pulled the knife from its sheath, feeling its pathetic weight in his hands. The length of his arm, it might just puncture the beast's outer shells. Run! Dolan spun in the deep snow and bolted for the pass. Chapter 3. Dolan's heart pounded in his chest as he slogged through the snow, terrified to look behind him. The sound of his own breath masked the beast's approach. Drillers. They were named for the sharp points on their chins, used to punch holes in the frozen, lifeless lakes that never fully thawed in the high mountain passes. So much snow, but the liquid water was often beneath a foot-thick covering of ice. The bottoms of the lakes teemed with life, warmed by underground springs, but the surface was inhospitable to even the hardiest of Earth's creatures. Drillers carved great gashes in the ice for their own drinking water, and often waited in ambush for other creatures to approach the cold oasis. Were they chasing him? Maybe they weren't hunting? He risked a glance over his shoulder. 3 huge monsters, closer than when he'd turned, gaining on him. Wind swept across the plain. In places, the snow piled up past his knees, grabbing at his sodden boots. He burst through a snowbank and rushed out onto a flat, smooth surface, barely dusted with flakes, and picked up speed. Dolan cursed the darkness. In the pale moonlight, the mountains hulked all around him, crowding in from all sides. Where was the pass he'd come up? The ledge was narrow, and the beasts behind him wide. If he could make it to the ledge, they might have to give up the chase. Another glance behind. 2 of the beasts were close enough to make out the thick, ropey hair that covered their 6-legged bodies. The glowing eyes peered out from beneath it, in a face of hard, chitinous plates. Where was the 3rd one? Dolan plunged ahead, breath coming in short, freezing gasps. He stumbled, crashing to his knees. The knife fell from his fingers and spun away across the ice. Wind stung his eyes, freezing the lashes together as he struggled to his feet. He could hear them now, so close behind. "Oh, Rayleigh, I'm so sorry." The thought of her lying in their bed, counting on him to return with the healing herbs, spurred him forward, staggering in the blinding sleet. He crashed through piles of ice shards, careening forward. From the darkness at his left loomed a huge, white shape. The driller crashed into him, throwing him across the ice. The sky above him spun as he skidded over the surface, scrambling to roll over and get to his knees. Before he stopped sliding, he managed to get a boot underneath him and lunged away from the approaching beast. They were faster than he was, as tall as his shoulder and so much stronger. 6 legs made them sure-footed on the smooth, snow-dusted surface. Dolan had no idea which way the pass was, and even if he did, he'd never make it. He dodged another high snowdrift, limping forward across the white ground. It was rougher here, jagged and torn, but the beasts had not grabbed him yet. He remembered the sound of the driller that had mangled his ranch hand, how his bones had snapped in the creature's mandibles. The risen had not screamed. Impervious to pain, the man had fought back, even as his legs were torn from his body and his chest crushed with a whoosh of dark, bloody foam. Dolan was alive. His blood would flow bright against the snow when the drillers tore him apart. One of his gloves was gone, and his fingers were numb. Beneath his boots, shards of ice shattered as he staggered on. He could hear them now, so close. A gust of wind whipped into his face, and he lowered his head, pushing through a waist-high pile of jagged ice. Why was the ice so broken up here? There were no mountain ledges for it to have slid down from. Something must have churned up the tundra here, something strong enough to hurl man-sized chunks of ice from the frozen ground. Dolan's boot slipped on smooth wetness, and he plopped down backward, hearing a sickening crack. "Oh, sweet Monin!" He sat up and peered ahead of him, squinting down at the ground. One step more, and he'd have fallen straight into a wide pool dug into the surface of the frozen lake he'd been running on. Drillers. This was their oasis. They'd herded him straight into their trap. Just one more step, and he would have plunged in. His heavy clothes would try to drag him down, but the drillers would pluck him out before he sank, and eat him at the edge of the hole. "Get up! Run around it! Try!" But they were right behind him. Even as he stood, he heard their feet skitter to a halt just a few paces away. He turned to face his death. They flanked him on both sides, with one straight ahead. The only path open was back, into the icy water. They stood still, eyes red against their fur, not white, as he had thought. This close, he could see the filth staining the long, twisted ropes of hair. Blood from their prey caked along their front legs under hulking shoulders. If they stood upright on their hind legs, they would tower over Dolan by a head. But they crouched now, all 6 legs poised to lunge. Gray drool pooled around the hard faceplates, exposed to the cold. The thick, pointy chins tapped against the ice as they bobbed their heads in anticipation of the meal that shivered before them. Visions of Rayleigh swam before his eyes. She would live. Somehow she would survive and raise their child without him. They would never know what happened to him. Nothing would be left to rise. And even if there was, it would be frozen solid, unable to animate and return to her. This was it. The final death, without even the cleansing kiss of fire to speed his soul to the Atta in the heavens. Tap, tap, tap. The beasts took a small step forward, and Dolan shuffled backward. Tap, tap. Crack! Dolan registered the sound an instant before he fell, the thin, battered ice at his feet giving way beneath him. He gasped a single breath as he plunged into the water, clawing at the ice shards shattering around him. He had a brief vision of one of the drillers plunging under with him, but the water closed over his head and his eyes snapped shut at the sudden shock. A lifetime of cold in the mountains had never prepared him for the breath-stealing stupefaction of the frigid water's embrace. Swim! Escape! His ungloved hand was a useless claw, beating at the water that pulled him down. He kicked with heavy boots, straining toward the faint glow of the surface. Pull! Kick! One glove closed around the edge, and he hauled himself up, face emerging for a single intake of air before a sharp pull dragged him down, skidding along the underside of the ice. The driller that had fallen in grasped Dolan's boot with one of its hairy legs. Dolan kicked and struggled, and the beast fell away into the depths. Swim! Find the hole! Dolan banged his fists against the underside of the ice, pounding at the jagged ceiling that kept him from moonlight and air. He clawed his way along, searching for the opening, lungs burning to breathe. But it was so cold. The ice water filled his ears, freezing his eyes and lips. His soaked clothing weighed like stones, sapping the will from his muscles. Each pull was like climbing a mountain, every second pulsing in his throat. His movement slowed. So close. He could see the hole in the ice just a few feet away. If only he could reach it. Just one breath. He flung an arm forward, his heavy coat catching on a sharp edge of ice. So heavy. He hung there in the freezing water, struggling to free his coat, desperate to breathe. Rayleigh, I'm so sorry. The dim light of the moon wavered through the thick ice above him, and Dolan's vision went black. And that's where we'll leave The Risen by D.W. Vogel. If you're hooked and you'd like to keep reading, you'll find a link in the description for where to purchase the book. Here's a quick summary. In 90 years of unbroken light, humans build great cities on the surface of Barun. In 10 years of darkness, monsters from beneath destroy those cities and those who dwell within them. Only the risen dead, who awaken when darkness floods the land, stand between the living and the beasts of Nightfell. The caravan will have the herbs. That's what Dolan tells himself as he leaves his wife Rayleigh struggling to birth their first child. Without the herbs, she won't survive. But the healers are far away, up a steep mountain pass guarded by hungry insectoid beasts. In the last days of Nightfell, when the world has been dark and cold for a decade, Dolan must leave Rayleigh's side and brave the monsters of the night to save her life. Sorag lives safely within the desert city of Somta, thanks to a peace treaty with the Beneathers. But the Risen are in rebellion, and Sorag's scientific discovery has the potential to completely rewrite the relationship between the Risen and the living. But what cost is she willing to pay to continue the peace, and who is she willing to sacrifice? As Dolan's journey leads him to Somta, his path and Sorag's intertwine, with the fate of the Risen on their shoulders. The Risen was recommended to me by a previous author featured here on First Chapter Indie Reads, Nicholas Everhart. I'm pleased to share it with you, but I don't hold out much hope for Dolan against the drillers in the icy lake. What do you think his chances are for survival? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can discover more remarkable indie authors. If you'd like to support my work further, you can subscribe to me on Substack. There you'll find author interviews, extended readings, some book features that might not be suitable for YouTube, and more perks. You'll find the link in the description. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.